Have you ever wondered what spirituality really is? You've heard it said all the times, develop a deeper relationship with God, but do you really know how? Stay tuned and I'm going to help you figure that out. Hi, I'm Chad Torgerson, and I'm best known for my work on Waking Up Catholic, a site that I started 10 years ago when I first came over to the Catholic faith. Now, if you're not Catholic, I don't want you to go anywhere because I promise I've got some information for you too. And really what we're talking about is information that's not really anything specific to just Catholics. I think it's information that everybody could take into their heart and grow from. What we're talking about today is Christian spirituality. What is it exactly? Well, most of the people that come to my site are new to the faith, and they've been given a lot of different materials. They've been given books to read and everything else. If you know anything about me and the way I write and what I talk about, one of the things that I have a difficult time with is that our focus is so much on theology. Theology is great and I love it. I'm actually kind of a nerd myself. I spend a lot of time reading books. I've got a stack of them over here, right? But reading books isn't going to help us develop a relationship with God. It helps in a sense of we get to know who He is. Now, in the same token, if I were to give you my autobiography, if we were to spend time and you actually read my life story, you would know a lot about me. You would know my story. You would know where I grew up, the relationships I've had in my life, my struggles, my successes, everything else. But beyond all that, would you really know me at that point? You could read a biography on Abraham Lincoln and you're going to know about him, but are you going to know him? And there's a big difference there. And it's the same thing with our relationship with God. We can read scripture every day, and it's a great thing to do, and it's an important part of developing your faith. But that's going to help you know about God. How do you know God? The reason why God gives us scripture is so that we've got a way to connect with Him directly. Not only just in the written word, but then we take that into our prayer lives, and that's really the key. Is that we go beyond reading books and we go beyond studying everything and becoming theologians, right? The world needs theologians. There's some great ones out there, but the truth of the matter is we're not all going to be theologians. It's just not possible, and that's okay. And I've actually set out my life to not be a theologian. To give you a little bit about where I'm at right now myself, I actually decided that it was time for me to go get another degree. I had started writing about 10 years ago and really enjoyed it. But then I took a little bit of a hiatus when my kids were born. But now it's time for me to get back out there and start spending more time writing again. But this time I decided that it would be beneficial if I had a better background, that if I went to school and learned a little bit more about it. Now, when you start looking at degrees out there, the first options that you're going to see, there's a lot of options for pastoral care. So for people that want to spend time taking care of members in the church, people that are grieving, people going through difficult times in their life. There's also a lot of classes and degrees out there that are focused on theology. And of course, the world needs theologians. We need to study the Bible. The more we understand about the Bible, the better we'll all be. And there's a definite need and a call for that. And so I actually chose to get a degree from Loyola University that was focused on spirituality. And the reason why I like that is because I think that spirituality is really the key to taking your faith to that next level. Now, the focus of this degree is actually in spiritual direction, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a few minutes, right? But first, let's talk about spirituality, what it is, and what exactly is the point of it, and what is the purpose of trying to develop a spiritual life. So spirituality, in a sense, if you really want to break it down, it's just having a relationship with God. And again, you've probably heard that so many times before that that's our first duty and call as a Christian, is to develop our spiritual life, to develop that relationship with God. That's a lot easier said than done a lot of times, though. I mean, how many of us can really say that we know God? Like I talked about earlier, we've read the books and we know His story. But how much do we really know Him personally? How much do we really know Him on the inside? And that's really the difficult part for all of us, right? Myself included, right? I don't want you to think that you're alone here and that the struggles that you're having, that you're alone. I can guarantee you everyone else that's watching this video is probably feeling the same way, right? And if anyone's so sure of themselves that they think they've got this perfect relationship with God, I think they need to check again, right? So again, we need to develop this deeper relationship with God. How do we do that? Well, I think it's actually pretty simple. If you wanted to get to know me, after you've read my book, go buy it if you could. It's on Amazon.com called Waking Up Catholic. But after you've read my book, if you wanted to really get to know me, the first step that you'd probably want to do is come sit down and have a conversation with me. Get to know me a little bit more. Find out what my likes and dislikes are. Figure out what my personality is. How do I act? And what drives me? What motivates me? For me, it's my family, my kids, my faith. Those are the things that get me up in the morning and keep me moving and make me want to not only be a better man, but be a better Christian. Now, the only way that you're really going to find, I can tell you that right now, but the only way you're really going to find that out is to spend some time talking with me. Now, you've got relationships in your life, whether it's work or school or anywhere else really, that you've made friends. For me personally, I went to work one day, met a girl, and a few years later married her. Now, it wasn't simply because we worked together that we developed that relationship. Sure, we spent time together every day and we worked alongside each other, but over time, we started to get to know each other. We started to talk about our lives and what was going on and sharing our hopes and our dreams, our fears and our failures. And that's how our relationship went to that next level, was because we were able to open up to each other and tell and say everything about our lives. There wasn't anything hidden anymore. And so if we want to have that relationship with God, we got to start the same way. The more that you and I spend time together, the more we talk, the more you're going to get to know me. If we sat down once in a while, we'd become acquaintances. And over time, maybe good acquaintances. But if you're only seeing each other once a month, maybe once or twice a year for those that like to go to church on Christmas and Easter, how much of a relationship would you really expect to develop with somebody? I know that when I see my family, if I were to only see them twice a year, well, our relationship's going to suffer. What really drives that relationship and makes it develop and grow into something more is the fact that we see each other all the time and the amount of time that we spend together. The more time that we can devote to God, then, we're going to start to see some of the same results. So how exactly do I find time for God? Well, I've struggled with that myself, and I don't want you to think for a second that you're alone, because I think it's something that we all struggle with. With the chaos of life and with everything going on around us, how do we really take time just to focus on our spiritual life? Just like when you start a new relationship, you don't dive right in, right? You take small chunks. When my wife and I first started dating, now we worked together, so it was a little bit different. We actually saw each other every day at work. But generally speaking, when you start dating somebody, you go on a date. Maybe 3 or 4 days later, you go on a second date. You talk on the phone, you send a few texts, you go on another date. And over time, you start spending more and more time together, and it actually starts to feel more natural because it's becoming a routine. And it's something that as your relationship with that person is growing, you actually start to feel a little bit excited about it. And I hope that's the same thing that's going to happen with your relationship with God. That's going to start off small, and maybe you almost have to force it a little bit. And that's okay. We've all been there, right? Take it slow. You start off 5 minutes a day. Just say a couple of simple prayers. Find yourself a prayer book that you can pray along to. If you're Catholic like me and you know a lot of the old traditional prayers, the Our Father, the Hail Mary, the Glory Be, start there. It's okay. You don't have to be the best at prayer right off the bat. No one's going to expect you to be. But over time, as you start to do it more often, it's going to come more naturally. Pretty soon you're just going to be sitting down and you're going to have little chats with God. Over time, actually, you'll probably find that you'll be standing in the line at the grocery store and you'll have a little chat with God. Over time, he's going to become a more important part of your life, but it all starts with small chunks. It's not all going to happen right off the bat. And again, that's okay. We've all been there, we've all done that, and don't fault yourself. So after you've started these conversations with God and you've started developing a deeper spiritual life, where does it go from there? What can you do to take your faith beyond that? Once you spend some time with somebody, you start to break the ice a little bit. Now your conversations go from talking about the weather and talking about the news and what's going on at work and why you were late to work that day or whatever else may be going on. And you start to talk about what you did that weekend. You talk about the relationships you have in your life. You talk about the more difficult things that you've had to deal with. And over time, that conversation starts to open up. A relationship with God is going to work the same way. At first, you may start with just those basic prayers. But over time, you're going to give Him a little bit more of yourself. And you're going to keep opening up and sharing more about your day with Him. You're going to tell Him more about what's going on in your life, your fears, your sadness, your anger, your joys, your happiness, all of it. The more you can be open and honest with God, the more that relationship's going to grow. So over time, as you start to do that, you're going to notice something. You're going to notice that it's going to, for one, it's going to be a lot easier, right? Faith is just going to be a daily part of your life. Prayer is just going to be something that's there. You're going to be talking to God all the time. So that's how prayer develops. It's not all in one big step. It's something that we all have to grow into. Not everybody starts off with a great prayer life. I still struggle with it. I've been a Christian for 20 years now, and there's times where I go weeks without praying. I'm being honest here. You know, it's something that I want to bring into my daily life, and there's ways that I do, whether it's prayer before meals. My wife and I like to say a prayer before we go to bed at night. But there's times where I just really don't open up to God. We all go through those spiritual times of darkness, and that's okay. There's actually a lot of the great mystical minds throughout the years that have talked about this dark time that you go through. And so it's okay. Don't feel like you're alone. But the point is that regardless of how many dark times that you go through, that you keep moving forward. That even when you struggle with those times, that no matter how many times you go through those dark periods, you realize that it's when you turn back to faith and you turn back to your prayer life that usually you find your way out of it. So this is not just something that you're doing for God's sake or because you feel that you have to because, you know, the pastor or the priest told you that you should. You're doing it because you're actually learning that developing this relationship with God is one of the most important relationships you have in your life. So now that you've started to develop this relationship with God, what's next? How do you take this relationship and really go to the next level with it? So many of the people that are coming to this channel may be new to the faith. I was there myself. About 20 years ago is when I first came to faith, and about 10 years ago is when I first came to Catholicism. So I know how overwhelming it can feel when you first join the church and you're trying to figure out, what do I do next? The first thing that a lot of people feel that they need to do is they pick up a book. There are so many books out there, it's a never-ending sea of paper, right? So where do you begin? Now, of course, I think having the basics of the faith down is pretty important, right? Understanding what it is exactly that you believe, I think that's kind of where you start, right? That's actually why the first book that I wrote, Waking Up Catholic, that's what it was. It was, hey, here's the basic issues and questions that people have about the Catholic faith. Now, of course, if you're not Catholic, I'm sure other denominations are going to have something similar. And the same thing when you go through the preparation process, they're going to start off by teaching you those basic tenets of the faith. And that, I think that's a perfect place to start. But over time, you're going to want more. And really, honestly, if that's where you stop, is just learning those basic tenets of the faith, I hate to say it, but your faith is going to struggle over time. What's really going to take you to the next level is when you start to develop that relationship with God. When you start seeking spirituality and you start trying to be closer to Him on a daily basis. One of the most used apps on my phone is the Maps. We love going different places as a family. We're constantly trying new things and going different places. And generally, I don't know where I'm going. So the first thing I do is type in where I'm at, type in where I'm going, and click Find Directions. And the app magically pulls up exactly how to get from point A to point B. Wouldn't it be great if our spiritual life was that easy? One of the important things about the app is that there's a voice that's constantly telling you where to turn. It'll tell you, in 200 feet, turn right. In 1 mile, take the next exit. Those directions are going to help you get where you're going. So instead of having to stare down at your phone, where you're likely to get lost or possibly get into an accident staring at your phone, the voice is like someone on the outside looking in. They know exactly where you're at, and they're going to give you some advice on where to go next. Now, of course, it's up to you whether you take it, but that's what a spiritual director does. They're not necessarily going to tell you the exact directions of where to go, right? But they're going to listen, and they're going to hear what's going on in your life, and they're going to ask the right questions that help guide you to your next step. In the end, it's up to you as far as whether you make that turn or not. They're simply there to help guide you. It's actually pretty simple. You sit down with somebody, tell them about your story, tell them your life, what's going on, how your days have been going, and you tell them about your faith. You tell them, how's your prayer life going? How often are you going to church? Do you feel a connection with God? What emotions are you feeling towards God right now? Are you grateful? Are you sad? Are you angry? Because all those are very natural emotions to have when it comes to our relationship with God. And I think the more that we develop our faith, you'll start to see that you're going to have a whole series of emotions that we may not be able to pick apart on our own. But if once a month or maybe once a week or sometimes once a quarter, whatever you feel comfortable with, you sit down with somebody else and tell them about your spiritual life and where you're at. As somebody that's on the outside looking in, they can give you that advice. They can help you peel back the layers to figure out what is the next step. What exactly should you be doing to develop your faith and go beyond where you're at right now? Generally speaking, when you sit down with a spiritual director, you'll start the conversation with telling them about what's going on in your life right now. Tell them about your prayer life. Where do you feel that you're at? And they're going to start to ask questions. Probing questions. Questions that are going to spark your mind a little bit. And that's the idea, is that instead of them just giving you the directions of what you need, they're going to ask the questions to help you figure out where you need to go yourself. Now, something to remember is that when you're sitting down with a spiritual director, it's not just the two of you. The Holy Spirit's always there with you. Some spiritual directors actually will take the time to light a candle, to have a third chair in the room, or do something that helps us realize that it's not just the two of us in the room, that we're actually sitting down between the two of us with the Holy Spirit there with us. So why do we need spiritual direction? We were never meant to go through this life alone. So the point of a spiritual director is to be there with us. Somebody that we know and that we can trust is going to help us on this path. So how do you choose a spiritual director? Now, most people's first thought is to go to their local priest or pastor and ask them to be their spiritual director. And that makes sense. And a lot of them are great spiritual directors. Now, if they're a priest or a pastor who is in charge of 500 or 1,000 or 3,000 families, imagine if just 10% of their parishioners wanted spiritual direction. Now, the numbers aren't that high, I get it, but even if 1% wanted that, they could almost fill their schedule just with spiritual direction. So for us to think that we're going to solely look at priests and pastors to be our spiritual directors probably is limiting ourselves. So another place we might look to is other friends or family, people that we know that are of faith that have a strong spiritual life themselves. At times though, when it comes to people in our personal life, we might be afraid to really open up and tell some of the darker secrets that are going on in our life. If you really want to open up and talk about your faith, that might not be the best option. So what do you do then? Well, there's people like me that are going through training for spiritual direction right now, and obviously some that have completed it, that's what their main focus is. Their goal is to help others in their journey and walk in faith. They may work for a parish, they might work for a retreat house, and just offer spiritual direction on the side. Now, the ministry of that spiritual director is focused on this. They have the training and the background and the experience really to be able to help you on that journey. So going with a spiritual director who does that as a profession, that's another option for you. Now, whatever option you choose to go with is up to you, right? There's obviously even more choices than that, different places you can go. That's just 3 ideas that I came up with. I hope I've answered some of your questions today about spirituality, about your prayer life, and what a spiritual director is and how they can help. Again, this is my first video, but I hope to be coming out with more, so I ask you to click like and subscribe. Make sure to put in the comments section what a good grade I should get from Dr. Davis. And if you dislike this video, go ahead and click the dislike button twice. You'll probably figure out what that means later. Thanks again, and I'll see you soon.